A quiet presence in first class. Anthony Carter walked into the first-class cabin of the airplane with a composed and quiet confidence, his dark blue suit fitted to perfection. It was the kind of outfit that didn't scream wealth, but rather whispered it, understated and elegant, a marker of a man accustomed to high expectations. Anthony was known in business circles for his calm yet powerful demeanor and his willingness to experience situations from all perspectives. Today, he wasn't just any passenger in first class. He was there to gauge the service standards of an airline he had invested in, an airline that held a stake in his future plans. He'd taken this approach several times before, opting to slip into the role of an ordinary customer to evaluate the experience as it was offered to the everyday traveler. He believed that the true pulse of a company lay in the details, the way employees interacted with customers, the quality of the services, and the overall ambience created for those who had invested in the privilege of flying first class. Today, however, Anthony found himself not only an observer, but also the subject of someone else's judgment. Sarah, the lead flight attendant, appeared to have noticed Anthony as soon as he entered the cabin. Her gaze lingered on him a little too long, her expression tinged with a subtle hint of suspicion. She held herself with the practiced poise of someone who prided herself on delivering first-rate service. Her years with the airline had taught her the importance of professionalism, efficiency, and, in her mind, a discerning eye. Yet today, that discernment seemed focused on one man, Anthony. Anthony placed his carry-on in the overhead compartment and settled into his seat, his gaze wandering across the cabin as other passengers filed in. He noted the friendly exchanges between Sarah and the rest of the first-class travelers. She moved with precision, offering welcoming smiles, assisting with luggage, and making small talk in the way only seasoned attendants could, her warmth evident to everyone else but him. Moments later, she made her way over to him, her steps brisk, her posture immaculate. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice professional yet holding an undercurrent that was difficult to miss. "Could I please see your ticket?" Anthony, momentarily surprised, handed over his ticket without hesitation. He could feel her gaze flicking between the ticket and his face, as if trying to piece together a mystery that only she perceived. She handed it back without a word, her eyes lingering a moment too long before offering a tight, barely there nod. "Thank you," she muttered before moving away. Anthony gave a soft sigh, his expression betraying no irritation. He was used to reading such subtle signs, the unspoken language of prejudice that sometimes lingered beneath the surface of interactions. He had hoped this journey would be different, a seamless experience where professionalism outshined bias, but Sarah's demeanor hinted otherwise. Minutes passed, and the cabin bustled with pre-flight preparations. Anthony watched as Sarah made her way down the aisle, interacting with each passenger, offering them beverages, adjusting pillows, and ensuring they were comfortable. Her friendliness was palpable with every traveler, until she reached his seat once more. She paused, her professional mask slipping slightly, her gaze colder. "Is there anything specific you need, sir?" she asked, her tone just a little too sharp, as if preempting an unreasonable request. Anthony's lips curved into a polite smile. "No, thank you," he replied, his voice steady and calm. There was a touch of disappointment in his tone, a quiet sense of dignity that seemed to irritate her even further. She hesitated, and then, with a stiff nod, moved away. As she walked off, a man seated across the aisle from Anthony shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the scene before quickly immersing himself back into his newspaper. Down the row, a woman leaned in to whisper to her husband, a hint of curiosity in her eyes. "Did you see that? She's asked him twice already if he's in the right seat. I've never seen that happen in first class." The murmurs were subtle, yet Sarah remained undeterred. She continued her rounds, her demeanor outwardly calm, though her glances toward Anthony carried a thread of discomfort that she couldn't quite mask. Each glance felt like a subtle reminder, an inspection, a suggestion that he didn't quite belong. Anthony glanced around, taking in the ambience of the cabin. The luxurious surroundings, the carefully curated design, the elegant seats, all details he had approved as part of his investment in the airline. He had hoped these refinements would foster a sense of inclusivity, a place where every traveler in first class felt equally valued. But in Sarah's eyes, he could sense the reluctance to afford him the same respect she readily offered others. A few moments later, she returned, this time with a glass of water. She placed it on his tray table with a stiff nod, almost as if she were doing him a favor. "There you go, sir. Let us know if you need anything else," she said, her voice tight. Anthony looked at her, his expression composed, an eyebrow raised slightly in acknowledgement. "Thank you," he replied, his voice warm, his tone carrying a quiet dignity that seemed to unnerve her. He maintained his calm despite the slight, a quality he had cultivated over years of experiencing such encounters. But Sarah did not leave. Instead, she lingered for a moment longer, seemingly searching for something, some validation of her preconceived notions. "And just to clarify," she added, her question strange, her gaze unwavering, "are you traveling for business or pleasure?" Anthony tilted his head slightly, catching the unspoken message beneath her words. "A bit of both," he replied, his tone thoughtful, as he watched her reaction closely. "I see," she responded curtly, finally stepping away, her lips pressed into a thin line. Her professionalism was waning, her mask slipping as her discomfort became more evident. She seemed determined to validate whatever assumptions she held about him, subtly reinforcing her authority with every curt glance and pointed question. For the next hour, she circled the cabin, meticulously attending to each passenger with warm towels, attentive smiles, and refilled glasses. But with Anthony, her demeanor remained distant, her interactions minimal, and her glances frequent. It was almost as if she was determined to assert her power, to remind him, without words, that she controlled his comfort in this space. Finally, as the plane settled into its cruising altitude, Sarah approached him once more. This time, her tone was sharper, her words laced with a thinly veiled edge. "Mr. Carter, is it?" she asked, her voice clipped. Anthony nodded, his expression calm yet his eyes revealing a slight flicker of irritation. "Well," she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "I do hope you understand that first-class passengers are expected to uphold a certain standard. We work very hard to ensure all guests are accommodated properly," she added, glancing around as if seeking validation from the other passengers. Anthony met her gaze, his voice measured and firm. "I appreciate your concern," he replied gently, "and I trust that all guests are treated with respect, regardless of how familiar their faces may be to the crew." Sarah's smile faltered, her posture stiffening as his words registered. For the first time, she seemed caught off guard, the certainty of her judgment shaken. But instead of acknowledging her misstep, she simply straightened, murmured a brief "enjoy your flight," and moved away, her professionalism visibly cracked. As she walked away, Anthony let out a slow breath, gazing out the window. He could feel the weight of each slight, each small reminder that prejudice often lingered in unexpected places. This wasn't the journey he had anticipated, but in that quiet moment, he resolved that it would be one of learning, a testament to the quiet dignity with which he would face whatever came next. The power of patience. Anthony sat quietly in his seat, eyes focused on the expanse of clouds stretching outside the window. The beauty of the sky had always been a sanctuary for him, a place where the troubles of the world seemed small and insignificant. Yet today, even amidst the serene view, he felt the weight of his experiences pressing on him, old memories resurfacing. He had been through this too many times, the subtle, quiet rejection that didn't require raised voices or aggressive words, but cut just as deeply. The situation with Sarah reminded him of other times, other places where people had questioned his presence, his worth, his right to be where he was. But he had always handled these encounters with the same strength, the same grace, a quiet resolve that had shaped him into the man he was. Patience had become his armor and dignity his weapon. As he sat reflecting, the steady hum of the plane faded into the background. Sarah's actions felt like a reminder that, despite his success, he was still perceived through a narrow lens by some, defined not by his achievements but by his appearance. A familiar flicker of frustration stirred within him, but he quickly quelled it, breathing deeply and reminding himself of the purpose of his journey. His thoughts were interrupted when a voice came from across the aisle. "Excuse me, sir," said the businessman who had been seated nearby, his gaze sympathetic. He looked like he was in his 50s, his demeanor softened by an air of quiet wisdom. "I couldn't help but notice what just happened." His words were cautious, respectful, as if he were treading carefully. Anthony turned to face him, offering a warm, understanding smile. "It's all right," he replied, his voice steady and calm. "I'm used to it." The man shook his head, a faint frown creasing his brow. "You shouldn't have to be. It's unacceptable," he said, his voice low but firm. He glanced toward the back of the cabin, where Sarah was occupied with another passenger, and then returned his attention to Anthony. "If you'd like, I'd be happy to speak to someone on your behalf. That kind of treatment shouldn't be tolerated, especially not here." Anthony regarded him with a mixture of gratitude and empathy. He appreciated the man's offer, but he also knew that it would only serve to escalate the situation. He had seen it before: the anger that simmered when someone else spoke out on his behalf, the defensive wall that people like Sarah would build in response. No, this required a different approach, one that spoke to his own values. "I appreciate that," Anthony replied warmly, "but I prefer to handle it in my own way. Sometimes a quiet response speaks louder than any complaint could." The businessman nodded, admiration evident in his eyes. "Well," he said, leaning back in his seat, "if there's anything I can do, you just let me know. You deserve to be here as much as anyone else." "Thank you," Anthony said, his gratitude sincere. It was a simple exchange, but it brought him a sense of solidarity, a reminder that there were still people who saw beyond the surface. As the flight progressed, Anthony noticed subtle shifts around him. Sarah continued to serve the other passengers with the warmth and charm she had withheld from him, yet her gaze occasionally flickered toward him, as if waiting for some kind of reaction, some confirmation that he was feeling the weight of her judgments. But Anthony remained calm, his expression serene, his demeanor composed. He knew that people like Sarah expected resistance, a visible reaction that would affirm their beliefs, and in denying her that, he reclaimed his own power. After a while, Anthony took out a notepad from his briefcase and began jotting down thoughts about the airline service, the areas where he saw potential for improvement, and the subtle yet powerful role that customer experience played in shaping a brand's reputation. His pen moved with purpose, the pages filling with observations both positive and critical, yet one theme lingered in his mind more persistently than any other: the need for sensitivity and inclusion training. As much as Sarah's actions had affected him, he saw an opportunity for growth, for the airline, and for individuals like her who might not realize the impact of their actions. His writing was interrupted again when the plane's intercom crackled to life. The captain's voice came over the speakers, announcing some minor turbulence ahead. The cabin crew quickly sprang into action, securing trays and instructing passengers to fasten their seatbelts. Anthony noticed Sarah hurrying up and down the aisle, her professionalism seemingly restored as she managed the cabin with efficient calm. But as the turbulence hit, something unexpected happened. The plane lurched suddenly, more violently than anticipated, sending a tray of drinks from the cart flying through the aisle. Several passengers gasped, and one let out a startled cry. Anthony felt his own seatbelt tighten as the plane dipped, the turbulence growing stronger. Amidst the chaos, he noticed Sarah struggling to stabilize herself, clutching the seat beside him for support. Without hesitation, Anthony reached out, offering his hand to steady her. Sarah looked at him, surprise flashing in her eyes as she hesitated. clearly torn. But another jolt from the plane forced her to accept his help, her fingers gripping his hand tightly as she regained her balance. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, something unspoken passed between them. A fleeting moment of vulnerability that cut through the layers of tension and judgment that had hung between them. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice almost too quiet to hear. Her expression softened, and for the first time, Anthony saw something other than suspicion in her gaze. "You're welcome," he replied simply, releasing her hand as the turbulence eased, and she regained her composure. She quickly straightened, brushing off the interaction as she resumed her duties, her professionalism reasserting itself. Yet there was a subtle shift in her demeanor, a hint of self-reflection that hadn't been there before. As the turbulence subsided and the flight settled back into a calm rhythm, Anthony returned to his notes, his mind now lingering on the exchange with Sarah. He wondered if that brief connection, that small gesture of kindness, might leave an impact on her, a moment that would stay with her long after the flight had landed. He believed in the power of such moments, the potential for people to change when confronted with their own prejudices, and he hoped that perhaps, in time, Sarah might come to see him differently. A short while later, as the cabin lights dimmed and passengers began to drift into sleep, Sarah approached his seat once more. Her expression was more neutral now, less guarded, though she still held herself with the same composure. "Mr. Carter," she began, her voice softer, "I wanted to apologize if my actions came across as less than professional earlier. It wasn't my intention to make you uncomfortable." Anthony looked up, his gaze steady but warm. He knew how difficult it could be to confront one's own behavior, to acknowledge a mistake, and he respected the courage it took to extend even a partial apology. "Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate that," he replied, his tone gentle yet sincere. "We all have moments where we could do better." She hesitated, her expression revealing a hint of surprise at his gracious response. I suppose we do," she admitted, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. She seemed to search for something else to say, but finding none, she offered a brief nod and stepped away. The interaction left Anthony feeling a sense of hope. It wasn't a full apology, nor was it an admission of prejudice, but it was a start, a small sign that perhaps Sarah was beginning to reconsider her assumptions. He believed that true change rarely happened overnight. It was a journey, often marked by small steps, subtle realizations, and moments of vulnerability. Anthony returned to his notes, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. He would recommend the changes he believed were necessary, propose training that emphasized the importance of empathy, understanding, and inclusion. He would ensure that the airline he had invested in reflected the values he held dear, not just in its services, but in the way it treated every person who walked through its doors. As he penned the final notes, the glow of the cabin lights reflecting on the pages, he felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. This journey had been different from what he'd expected, but it had served as a reminder that dignity wasn't something anyone could take away from him. It was something he carried within himself, a testament to his resilience and strength, an unbreakable part of who he was. And as the plane flew steadily toward its destination, Anthony closed his notebook, a slight smile on his face. The journey was far from over, both his and that of the airline he had invested in. But he knew that as long as he continued to approach each challenge with patience, kindness, and quiet strength, he would be able to face whatever came his way. Breaking the silence. The cabin had settled into a gentle quietness, most passengers dozing under the dimmed lights or engrossed in movies and books. The hum of the engines was a steady background melody, a reminder of their constant progress toward their destination. Anthony sat back in his seat, his mind still on the interaction with Sarah, the flight attendant whose subtle biases had marred the beginning of his journey. Yet her small apology lingered with him, sparking a cautious hope that change, though fragile, might be possible. He glanced out the window, his reflection faint against the dark sky. The vastness outside seemed to mirror his thoughts, the patience it took to bridge differences, the resilience required to remain true to oneself in the face of judgment. His journey as a man of color navigating spaces of influence had always been about persistence, about walking a fine line between dignity and resistance. His thoughts were interrupted when Sarah returned, this time with a slightly different expression. She appeared hesitant, as though a quiet conflict simmered beneath her professional facade. Anthony could tell that something was weighing on her, a shift that had been set in motion since their earlier exchanges. She cleared her throat, then leaned slightly toward him, speaking just above a whisper, her tone softer than he'd heard it before. "Mr. Carter," she began cautiously, I realized I may have been too quick to judge earlier. She paused, visibly grappling with her words. "It's just that sometimes I get protective of the atmosphere here in first class. I've always felt responsible for maintaining a certain order." Her choice of words struck Anthony, but he kept his expression neutral. He wanted to give her the space to articulate whatever she felt, even if it came out imperfectly. "I've seen a lot of different types of people," she continued, glancing around to ensure no one else could overhear. "But I suppose that can lead me to make assumptions that aren't always fair. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." Anthony nodded, acknowledging the effort it must have taken her to say those words. "Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate you saying that," he replied warmly. "It takes courage to confront our own judgments. None of us are immune to them, but it's what we do once we recognize them that matters." Her expression softened, her shoulders visibly relaxing as his words sank in. "I guess I was so focused on, well, my own perception of who fits in here. I realize now that it wasn't right. It's not my place to decide who belongs based on appearance alone." The conversation, though hushed, felt significant. It wasn't just an apology but an acknowledgement, a tentative step toward understanding. Anthony had encountered people before who viewed apologies as mere formalities, a polite concession without true reflection. But with Sarah, he sensed something more, a sincere grappling with her assumptions, a self-awareness struggling to emerge. They exchanged a few more words, and Sarah seemed almost relieved by the opportunity to share her perspective, as though she had been holding onto it for longer than she realized. She finally straightened, a faint smile touching her lips before she walked back down the aisle. As she left, Anthony felt a glimmer of satisfaction. This small, unspoken understanding between them was a rare and delicate victory, a reminder that even subtle shifts in perspective could have a lasting impact. He knew that his patience had contributed to this moment, and he felt a renewed sense of purpose for his journey. His quiet dignity had created an opening for dialogue, a space for Sarah to confront her own biases. A few minutes later, the businessman across the aisle, who had previously shown empathy toward Anthony, looked over and gave him a nod of approval. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes, a silent affirmation of the changes he had begun to set in motion. As the hours passed, the cabin grew quieter. Some passengers had drifted into sleep, while others immersed themselves in their own activities. Anthony returned to his notebook, jotting down ideas for the airline's future. His mind raced with plans for workshops, training sessions, and employee programs that could foster greater empathy and inclusivity. But amid his reflections, another memory surfaced, a recollection of his early days as a young entrepreneur when he had faced similar instances of judgment. His first business meeting had been in a lavish boardroom, surrounded by executives twice his age, each eyeing him with varying levels of skepticism. They had seen his youth, his background, his ambition, and assumed he was out of place. Yet over the years, he had proven himself not through grand gestures or confrontations, but through hard work and unwavering self-respect. He had built his empire on principles of integrity, respect, and resilience. He believed in the power of quiet strength, a quality he had inherited from his father, a man who had taught him the value of maintaining one's dignity, no matter the circumstance. As he reflected on these lessons, the intercom chimed, and the captain's voice came over the speakers, announcing that they would soon begin their descent. The announcement prompted a stir in the cabin as passengers began to wake up, stretch, and prepare for landing. Sarah returned, moving down the aisle with practiced grace, checking on passengers and ensuring everyone was comfortable for the descent. When she reached Anthony's row, her expression was different, more relaxed, almost grateful. She paused, giving him a small but genuine smile. "Thank you again, Mr. Carter," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "For understanding." Anthony returned her smile, his tone kind. "Of course, Sarah. We're all learning in this world. I'm glad we could have this conversation." As she moved down the aisle, Anthony felt a sense of closure, a quiet victory that only he and Sarah would understand. He knew that change wasn't a sweeping transformation, but a series of small, intentional steps. Today, they had taken the first of those steps, and while it might seem insignificant to an outsider, it held immense meaning to him. The plane continued its descent, the lights of the city below twinkling through the window. Anthony looked out, feeling a renewed sense of purpose, a quiet optimism for the road ahead. He knew that his journey didn't end here. The airline, his investments, his role in fostering a more inclusive and compassionate world, all of these were only parts of a larger mission he had dedicated himself to. As the wheels touched down, he felt the familiar thrill of landing, a feeling that always filled him with gratitude. The cabin filled with the soft rustling of passengers gathering their belongings, preparing to disembark. Anthony reached for his briefcase, his mind already racing with ideas and plans. He wanted to ensure that his experience today would translate into meaningful change, not only for himself but for all passengers. Once the plane came to a complete stop, the seatbelt signs blinked off, and the doors opened. Passengers began filing out, many offering him polite nods as they passed. The businessmen across the aisle gave him a firm handshake, a silent show of respect, before he exited the cabin. Anthony lingered, waiting until most passengers had disembarked before standing to retrieve his carry-on. As he moved toward the exit, he saw Sarah standing by the door, her gaze following him with a newfound respect. She offered him a warm smile, her expression sincere. "Safe travels, Mr. Carter," she said, a hint of genuine warmth in her tone. "Thank you, Sarah," he replied, pausing to meet her gaze. "And remember, everyone deserves to feel welcome, no matter where they are." She nodded, her expression thoughtful as his words settled with her. It was a simple parting, but it held the weight of the journey they had shared, a subtle acknowledgement that both of them had grown in their own ways. As Anthony stepped off the plane and into the bustling terminal, he felt a sense of peace. The journey had not been without its challenges, but it had reaffirmed his beliefs, strengthened his resolve, and reminded him of the power of patience and quiet strength. Outside, the city awaited him, filled with countless opportunities, challenges, and the promise of change. He knew that his work would continue, that he would push for greater inclusivity, foster empathy, and encourage others to see beyond the surface. He would take this experience, and all that it had taught him, forward into every decision he made. With a deep breath, he walked toward the terminal, his steps steady and purposeful. The world might not change overnight, but he was determined to make his mark, one small, meaningful step at a time. A mission begins. As Anthony exited the airport, the cool city air greeted him, a refreshing contrast to the tense atmosphere he had experienced on the plane. The stars sparkled faintly above the bustling lights of the city, and for a moment, he felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the freedom of simply being outside, where the weight of assumptions and subtle prejudices seemed to dissolve into the night. He hailed a cab to his hotel, reflecting on the events of the flight. The experience had stirred something within him, a renewed sense of purpose, and a desire to use his influence in more profound ways. He had always believed in leading by example, but today had shown him that even small moments of confrontation, when handled with dignity, could inspire change, both in others and in oneself. As the cab wound through the city streets, Anthony thought back to the origins of his career. Growing up, He hadn't had the privileges that many of his colleagues now took for granted. He had worked twice as hard, climbed the ladder with a steely resolve, and proven himself in spaces where his presence was often questioned. Along the way, he'd encountered countless situations similar to the one with Sarah, times when people made judgments before he even had a chance to speak. But each experience had reinforced his commitment to cultivating spaces where every individual felt seen, valued, and respected. The cab pulled up to his hotel, a sleek, modern building that was one of the city's architectural highlights. As he stepped out, Anthony's phone buzzed. It was a message from his assistant, reminding him of a meeting the following day with the board members of the airline he had invested in. He had planned to use the meeting to discuss general service improvements, but now he knew that his focus had sharpened. He would make it a priority to bring up the importance of cultural sensitivity training and inclusion programs for all employees, especially the cabin crew. His experience with Sarah was not an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a larger issue, one that required proactive measures to address. As he entered his hotel suite, he felt the familiar thrill of purpose. The luxurious room offered all the amenities a successful executive might expect, but he barely noticed. His mind was already strategizing, visualizing the change he could bring about. He walked to the desk, opened his laptop, and began drafting a proposal that would reshape the way the airline approached customer service training. His first objective was to introduce a comprehensive cultural sensitivity and empathy training program. He knew that such training would need to go beyond standard corporate messaging and instead foster genuine understanding and empathy. Employees would need to confront their unconscious biases, examine how these biases affected their interactions, and learn to approach every passenger with respect and kindness. The goal was to make empathy an intrinsic part of the airline's identity, not merely a corporate slogan. Anthony titled his document, "The Future of Service: Inclusivity, Empathy, and Excellence." He began with an overview of the airline's core values, highlighting the need to align service quality with those values. As he wrote, he included specific examples from his own experiences, sharing instances where small acts of dignity had made all the difference in customer satisfaction. His personal story with Sarah was not explicitly mentioned, but the essence of the experience underpinned every word. As the document grew, Anthony found himself drawn into the nuances of the subject. He outlined various training modules that could be implemented, from bias awareness workshops to role-playing exercises, where employees would step into the shoes of those they might typically judge. He envisioned a series of interactive sessions where crew members could engage in open discussions, sharing their own experiences, and learning to recognize the humanity in every passenger they served. The next section was perhaps the most ambitious. Anthony proposed establishing a program called Moments of Empathy, in which crew members would be encouraged to go beyond routine service to create meaningful connections with passengers. The program would reward employees for acts of kindness, understanding, and patience, reinforcing the importance of compassion in every aspect of their work. He knew that such moments, no matter how small, could leave a lasting impression on passengers, enhancing the airline's reputation and fostering loyalty. As he continued to flesh out the proposal, Anthony couldn't help but think of Sarah. He wondered what kind of impact a program like this might have had on her. Would her initial approach toward him have been different if she had been encouraged to see each passenger as an individual, rather than as a potential disruption to order? He realized that employees like Sarah weren't necessarily malicious. They simply needed the tools to recognize and confront their biases. He hoped this program could be the start of that journey for her and others like her. He was so engrossed in his work that he barely noticed the passing hours. By the time he leaned back, the first draft of the proposal completed, the sky was beginning to lighten with the early hues of dawn. Exhausted but satisfied, he saved the document, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment. This proposal was more than just a business strategy. It was a blueprint for change, a tangible way to transform a system that often failed to acknowledge the value of inclusivity. Later that morning, Anthony arrived at the airline's headquarters, his proposal in hand. The board meeting was held in a sleek, glass-walled conference room overlooking the city. The board members were seated around a polished table, their faces reflecting a mixture of curiosity and respect as Anthony entered. Many of them had heard of his reputation, a successful entrepreneur with a knack for innovation and a passion for integrity, and they were eager to hear his insights. After the standard introductions and agenda review, it was Anthony's turn to speak. He stood, his calm yet commanding presence filling the room as he addressed the board. "Good morning," he began, his voice steady. "Today, I'd like to discuss a vision for our airline that goes beyond excellent service. I believe that true success lies not only in offering luxury and convenience, but in fostering an environment where every passenger feels valued, respected, and seen." He paused, allowing his words to resonate. "In my recent travels, I had the opportunity to experience our service firsthand, and while I was impressed by the efficiency and attention to detail, I noticed an area where we can improve, a gap that, if addressed, could elevate our brand and set us apart in the industry." He presented his proposal, walking the board through each section with a measured pace, explaining how inclusivity and empathy were essential components of the modern travel experience. He shared data on customer satisfaction, citing studies that linked empathetic service with increased customer loyalty. He described the Moments of Empathy program, emphasizing how meaningful gestures could turn a routine flight into an unforgettable experience. As he spoke, he noticed nods of agreement, glances exchanged between board members, and a growing interest in his vision. When he concluded, the room was silent for a moment, as if the weight of his words was still settling over them. The CEO, an older man with a reputation for being pragmatic but fair, leaned forward. "Anthony, this is quite an inspiring proposal," he said, his tone thoughtful. "Your points about empathy and inclusivity are compelling. However, implementing such a program will require a significant investment of time and resources. Can you elaborate on the potential return on this investment?" Anthony nodded, prepared for this question. "Absolutely," he replied confidently. "The return on investment goes beyond immediate financial gain. By fostering a culture of inclusivity, we're not only enhancing the passenger experience, but also building a brand reputation that attracts loyal customers and sets us apart from competitors. Studies have shown that customers are willing to pay a premium for brands they trust and respect. An empathetic service model will position us as a leader in this space, attracting both new customers and retaining existing ones." He continued, outlining how a positive customer experience could lead to organic growth through word of mouth, social media engagement, and brand loyalty. "In an industry where competition is fierce, reputation is everything," he concluded. "By prioritizing empathy, we're investing in our long-term success." The CEO nodded, clearly impressed, and other board members voiced their agreement. The discussion continued, with Anthony answering questions, addressing concerns, and offering insights. By the end of the meeting, it was clear that his proposal had resonated deeply. The board agreed to move forward with a pilot program to test the training modules and assess their impact on customer satisfaction. As Anthony left the conference room, he felt a surge of pride. This was more than just a win for him. It was a step toward creating a better experience for countless passengers. He knew that the journey was far from over. That change would take time and perseverance, but he was ready to see it through. As he walked through the building's atrium, he passed a group of airline employees on a break, chatting and laughing. One of them, a young flight attendant, glanced his way and smiled politely, unaware of the changes he was working to bring to her world. In that moment, Anthony felt a profound sense of fulfillment. This wasn't just about a single flight or a single person. It was about reshaping the system to reflect the values he held dear. It was about building a world where no one would feel like an outsider in a space meant to be shared by all. And as he stepped out into the bright afternoon light, Anthony knew he was just getting started. The journey of dignity, compassion, and quiet strength he had carried within him for so long would now become a part of something much larger. something that could inspire countless others to see each person, each moment, with empathy and respect, transforming vision into reality. The months that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Anthony's proposal, the future of service, inclusivity, empathy, and excellence, had received overwhelming support from the board and ignited a wave of enthusiasm among key stakeholders at the airline. They understood that his vision went beyond standard customer service practices and addressed something more profound, a shift in corporate culture that would impact every layer of the organization. Anthony dedicated himself to turning his ideas into actionable steps. He collaborated with the airline's HR and training departments, diving into the specifics of the empathy training modules, the curriculum, and the interactive workshops that would guide the employees through this transformation. It was a complex task, one that demanded time, resources, and above all, patience. Yet, Anthony knew that real change was rarely swift or easy. It required persistence, an unwavering commitment to the goal, and the humility to adapt along the way. One of the first training programs he introduced was called Empathy in Motion. This program became a cornerstone of the airline's new approach to customer service, designed to take employees through a series of exercises that would challenge their perspectives and invite them to question their assumptions. Anthony wanted them to see beyond uniforms, beyond superficial details, and to view each passenger as a person with a unique story. In these sessions, crew members were encouraged to reflect on their experiences and confront their biases in a safe, open environment. Role-playing scenarios allowed them to step into the shoes of passengers from diverse backgrounds, simulating encounters that mirrored the real-world challenges they might face. Anthony himself attended many of these sessions, observing the crew as they worked through the exercises, watching them grow more open, more aware. He was especially moved by the impact of a particular module called A Seat for Everyone. In this exercise, flight attendants were invited to share stories of moments when they had felt judged or out of place, both in their personal lives and on the job. Anthony was struck by the vulnerability displayed during these sessions. Employees who had always seemed confident and composed now spoke of their own struggles, their own experiences of bias and exclusion. Sarah, the lead flight attendant from his own experience, had also joined the program. Anthony had made a point to follow her progress, curious to see how she would respond to the changes. To his quiet satisfaction, she seemed fully engaged, often staying after the sessions to speak with trainers, reflecting on her interactions with passengers, and sharing her newfound awareness with others. She had even become something of a mentor to newer crew members, advocating for patience, understanding, and the importance of recognizing each passenger's individuality. One afternoon, after a particularly intense session, Sarah approached Anthony. She appeared a little nervous but determined, as though she had something important to share. "Mr. Carter," she began, her voice steady but soft, "I just wanted to thank you. Not just for what you're doing here, but for that day on the flight. I didn't realize it at the time, but it was a wake-up call for me. I see things differently now, and I think I'm becoming a better person for it." Anthony smiled, a sense of pride warming his heart. "Thank you, Sarah. I'm glad to hear that. It takes courage to confront our own blind spots. I've always believed that change starts with a single step, and you've taken that step." She nodded, her expression sincere. "I've been thinking a lot about how I used to approach people, how I used to think that my job was to control the cabin. But now, I see it's about something much bigger. It's about making people feel welcome, respected, valued." Her words resonated deeply with Anthony. He could see that Sarah's transformation was genuine, a testament to the power of empathy and the willingness to grow. It was moments like these that fueled his mission, reminding him why he had embarked on this journey in the first place. As the months rolled on, Anthony's vision began to take shape in ways he hadn't fully anticipated. The Moments of Empathy program, which rewarded crew members for acts of kindness and understanding, became a resounding success. Employees across the airline embraced the initiative, creating moments of genuine connection with passengers, big and small. Stories poured in from travelers who had experienced thoughtful gestures from crew members, an elderly passenger who was helped with her luggage and given a seat upgrade, a mother traveling alone with her children who was offered extra support, a nervous first-time flyer who was calmed by a reassuring conversation. Each of these stories became a part of the airline's narrative, reinforcing the idea that empathy was at the heart of their service. Anthony collected these stories, often sharing them with the board, his team, and the crew, reminding everyone that the impact of their actions extended far beyond the confines of a single flight. This sense of shared purpose began to ripple through the organization, creating a new culture where kindness was celebrated as much as efficiency. But Anthony knew that true success required more than feel-good moments. It needed measurable results to ensure the sustainability of his vision. He worked closely with the airline's data team, analyzing customer feedback, satisfaction scores, and loyalty metrics to track the impact of the empathy training on the airline's reputation. The data showed a noticeable improvement in customer satisfaction, a marked increase in passenger loyalty, and a significant uptick in positive online reviews. Passengers were not only returning but also recommending the airline to others, sharing their positive experiences on social media, and creating a groundswell of goodwill that boosted the airline's public image. One day, during a quarterly board meeting, the CEO turned to Anthony with a smile, holding up a report that showed the latest customer satisfaction scores. "It's safe to say this was the right decision," he said, his tone laced with admiration. "You've managed to transform the airline's approach to service in a way that's not only improved our reputation, but has brought us closer to our customers. This empathy program, this commitment to inclusivity, has made us a standout in the industry." The board members nodded in agreement, their expressions reflecting a mixture of pride and gratitude. Anthony felt a profound sense of accomplishment. This wasn't just about numbers on a report. It was about proving that empathy had a place in the business world, that compassion and profit didn't have to be mutually exclusive. After the meeting, the CEO asked Anthony to stay behind for a brief chat. They walked through the glass-walled corridors of the headquarters, their footsteps echoing in the spacious hallway. The CEO turned to him, his expression thoughtful. "Anthony," he began, "I have to say, you've not only exceeded our expectations, but have redefined what this airline stands for. Your work here has set a precedent, and I believe it's only the beginning. I was wondering, would you consider expanding this initiative beyond just the crew? I think there's potential here to transform our entire organization." Anthony's mind raced with possibilities. He had focused primarily on the cabin crew, but the CEO was right. There were countless other departments within the airline that could benefit from this approach. From the ground staff to customer service agents, from security to operations, every aspect of the airline could be touched by empathy. It was a challenge, yes, but one that excited him. "I would be honored to," Anthony replied, a smile breaking across his face. "I think you're absolutely right. This could be a chance to create a cohesive culture of empathy across the entire organization." In the weeks that followed, Anthony set to work expanding the empathy initiative. He began by holding workshops with ground staff and ticket agents, encouraging them to see each traveler as an individual rather than just a seat number. He worked with the training team to create modules tailored to different departments, each focusing on the specific challenges employees faced and showing them how empathy could enhance their interactions. Meanwhile, the stories of moments of empathy continued to pour in, becoming an integral part of the airline's identity. These stories were shared not only within the company, but also with the public, transforming the airline into a symbol of kindness, inclusivity, and compassion. The airline's social media channels began featuring posts about extraordinary acts of service, and customers began using the hashtag empathy in flight, sharing their experiences and thanking crew members for their kindness. The airline's transformation started to catch the attention of industry leaders, travel bloggers, and news outlets. Journalists reached out to Anthony for interviews, eager to understand the man behind this revolutionary shift in customer service. The airline became a case study for empathy-driven business models, with other companies looking to replicate its success. One evening, Anthony found himself at a leadership conference where he had been invited to speak about his work. As he stood on the stage, looking out at the audience of executives, entrepreneurs, and professionals, he felt an overwhelming sense of fulfillment. He spoke not only of the changes he had implemented, but also of the importance of leading with integrity, of creating spaces where every person felt valued. The power of empathy, he said, lies in its ability to transform. When we see each other as human beings, when we choose to understand rather than judge, we create a world where everyone can thrive. And that's not just good for business, it's essential for humanity. His words were met with thunderous applause, and as he looked out at the audience, he knew that his journey was far from over. This mission, to create spaces of dignity, compassion, and respect, would continue to guide him in every step, every decision, every new venture. Anthony left the stage that night with a profound sense of purpose, a knowledge that his work would ripple out far beyond the confines of a single airline. He had not only transformed a business, he had ignited a movement, one that would inspire countless others to embrace the power of empathy in every aspect of their lives. And as he looked toward the future, he knew he would carry this mission with him, using it as a guiding light to create a world where dignity and compassion were woven into the fabric of every interaction. Building a legacy of empathy. The transformation within the airline became Anthony's blueprint for something much larger than he had initially envisioned. What had started as a personal experience with bias on a single flight had evolved into a comprehensive organizational shift. But Anthony wasn't content to stop there. He knew that the real test of change was sustainability, whether the values he had instilled could endure beyond his direct influence and permeate every corner of the company, every interaction, and every employee who joined their ranks. Anthony's success with the Empathy Initiative had drawn attention not only from industry leaders, but also from advocacy groups, human resources experts, and even educational institutions interested in exploring how empathy training could be integrated into corporate environments. He began receiving invitations to speak at universities, participate in panel discussions, and consult with other companies hoping to replicate his approach. Each invitation was an opportunity to share his philosophy, but it also solidified his conviction that the movement he had started could extend far beyond the airline industry. As his influence grew, Anthony decided to create a formal program that could serve as a model for businesses, schools, and organizations everywhere. He named it Empathy Works, a nonprofit organization dedicated to providing training and resources that fostered inclusivity, emotional intelligence, and understanding. Empathy Works would become his way of ensuring that his mission didn't just remain within the walls of one airline, but reached communities and workplaces around the world. The initiative attracted a diverse team of experts, psychologists, educators, business leaders, and social workers who shared his vision. Together, they developed a curriculum that covered everything from unconscious bias and active listening to conflict resolution and compassion-based leadership. The workshops included immersive activities, storytelling, and interactive discussions designed to encourage self-reflection and build skills that could be applied in any professional or personal setting. Anthony also knew that Empathy Works had to be accessible to all, not just large corporations with generous budgets. His own journey had been shaped by empathy and resilience despite humble beginnings, and he wanted to ensure that those without traditional access to resources could still benefit. He set up a scholarship fund, allowing smaller nonprofits, schools, and community centers to receive training at a reduced cost or even for free. It was his way of paying forward the kindness and patience he had received along his path. As Empathy Works gained traction, it started to produce tangible results. Schools that implemented the program reported reduced bullying, higher levels of student engagement, and stronger bonds between teachers and students. Businesses noticed improved team dynamics, increased employee satisfaction, and a boost in productivity. Even in communities where empathy training was offered through local centers, Participants reported feeling more connected, more seen, and more valued. Anthony was moved by each success story, knowing that the impact of empathy went beyond organizational metrics. It had the power to transform lives, families, and entire communities. Meanwhile, the airline itself had fully embraced the principles Anthony had introduced. Employees who had once seen empathy training as an abstract concept now embodied it in their day-to-day interactions. Flight attendants began sharing personal anecdotes with passengers, creating small but meaningful connections that turned routine flights into memorable experiences. Ground staff took the time to assist elderly passengers or young parents struggling with luggage, while customer service agents were trained to listen empathetically to complaints, ensuring that every passenger felt heard. One particularly memorable incident showcased the strength of Anthony's vision in action. A young mother, overwhelmed with a fussy baby and a toddler on a cross-country flight, had caught the attention of one of the flight attendants trained in Anthony's program. Recognizing the mother's distress, the flight attendant offered to help hold the baby while the mother settled her other child. She then brought over some small snacks and quietly reassured the mother, who was near tears. After the flight, the mother wrote an emotional letter to the airline, describing how that simple act of kindness had saved her sanity and made her feel valued in a way she hadn't experienced before. Stories like these were the lifeblood of the company's new culture, and they didn't go unnoticed. The airline's customer satisfaction scores continued to climb, and its reputation as a compassionate, service-oriented company spread rapidly. Social media posts with the hashtag empathy in flight became a testament to the success of Anthony's vision, with passengers sharing their own stories of meaningful moments experienced on board. The airline's CEO, deeply impressed by the program's success, approached Anthony with an idea that would take things even further. He proposed that the airline adopt a new tagline to reflect its dedication to empathy and inclusivity. Every journey matters. It was a simple yet powerful phrase that captured the spirit of Anthony's work. The tagline was adopted not only in the airline's advertising, but was also displayed in employee break rooms, printed on boarding passes, and highlighted on the company's website. It served as a reminder to everyone that each journey, whether in the air or in life, was an opportunity to make a positive impact. With the growing success of Empathy Works and the airline's new culture of inclusivity, Anthony found himself in the public spotlight more than ever. He was interviewed by major media outlets, featured in business journals, and invited to give a TED talk, where he spoke about the power of empathy as a force for change. His story resonated with audiences across the globe, and his message, that empathy was both a personal responsibility and a societal necessity, sparked a wave of enthusiasm. But Anthony remained grounded, aware that the true measure of success was not fame or accolades, but the lasting difference he could make in people's lives. He often thought back to that pivotal flight, the small glances and cold remarks that had initially triggered his mission. Sarah's face would come to mind, and he wondered where she was now, if she had continued her own journey of growth. He had heard through colleagues that she had become one of the airline's leading advocates for empathy, and that she even helped train new hires, sharing her story as a reminder that change often started with a moment of self-awareness. As Empathy Works continued to grow, Anthony decided it was time to focus on the next phase of his mission, reaching the leaders of tomorrow. He partnered with schools and universities, launching a program called Empathy Leadership Labs, where students could learn the fundamentals of compassionate leadership, cultural sensitivity, and effective communication. The program offered workshops, mentorship opportunities, and hands-on experiences in which students could practice empathy-driven problem-solving. He envisioned a generation of leaders who would value humanity as much as profit, who would understand that businesses could be both successful and socially responsible. One day, while visiting a high school that had recently implemented the Empathy Leadership Labs, Anthony had a profound conversation with a student named Jasmine. She was a senior who had grown up in challenging circumstances, navigating a world that often felt indifferent to her struggles. Through the empathy program, She had found a safe space to express herself and gain confidence. She thanked Anthony for his work, sharing that it had inspired her to pursue a career in social work. "Mr. Carter," she said, her eyes bright with determination, "I used to think people like me didn't matter much. But you've shown me that kindness and empathy aren't just words, they're actions. And now I want to spend my life helping others feel seen, the way you helped me feel seen." Her words stayed with Anthony long after he left the school that day. He realized that Jasmine, and countless others like her, were living proof of the power of empathy to create ripples that extended far beyond the initial act. Empathy Works had become more than a training program or a nonprofit. It had become a movement, a means of empowering individuals to make a difference in their own communities. As the years passed, Empathy Works grew into a global initiative, with chapters across continents, all dedicated to teaching empathy as a skill and fostering inclusive environments. Anthony's airline continued to thrive, its brand synonymous with compassionate service and integrity. And through it all, Anthony remained at the helm, as passionate about his mission as the day he first proposed it. One evening, as he was preparing for a speaking engagement, Anthony received a letter in the mail. It was handwritten, in neat, precise cursive, and as he opened it, he felt a surge of nostalgia. The letter was from Sarah. She had retired from the airline recently and wanted to express her gratitude for the impact his program had made on her life. She spoke of how the empathy training had opened her eyes, transforming not only her career, but her personal life as well. She had learned to see people, truly see them, and that change had deepened her relationships with her family, friends, and even strangers. "Thank you, Anthony," she wrote. "You taught me that we all have the power to grow, to change, to become better versions of ourselves. I'm grateful that you gave me that chance." Anthony read the letter in silence, his heart full. He had spent his life dedicated to creating a world where kindness and understanding were at the core of every interaction, and knowing that he had made a difference, even in one person's life, was a legacy he would carry with him always. As he stepped onto the stage that night, he looked out at the audience, people from all walks of life who had gathered to hear his story. He began with the same words he had often spoken, words that now held even greater meaning. Empathy is more than just a feeling. It's a choice, a practice, a way of life. When we choose to see each other as human beings, when we embrace our shared humanity, we can create a world where every person feels valued and every journey matters. The applause filled the room, a wave of support and admiration for a man who had dedicated his life to a simple, powerful truth. And as he looked out at the sea of faces, each one a new possibility, Anthony knew that the legacy of empathy he had built would live on, inspiring future generations to lead with kindness, to choose compassion, and to transform the world one small, meaningful act at a time.